In this lecture, we're going to move on from the heart and start talking about blood vessels. So blood vessels form the vascular system, and they are supposed to transport blood. So they transport blood to your tissues and then back to your heart. So the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart include arteries and arterioles. The place where exchange occurs are in your capillary beds, and then blood is returned to your heart through your venules and veins. There are structural differences between arteries and veins. Arteries have a much thicker wall. You can see that that's very thick relative to a vein, and we'll talk about why in the next few slides. Each blood vessel does have some microscopic anatomy we'll talk about. So they're made up of 3 layers. There's the tunica intima, that's the endothelium, and that lines the blood vessel. And then there's the tunic media, and that's the smooth muscle layer that is in each blood vessel, and that's controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. And then the tunica externa is the fibrous connective tissue that forms the outermost layer of each blood vessel. In this diagram, you can see the difference between a vein and an artery and a capillary. So veins and arteries do have all of those layers. So again, the tunic intima is the innermost layer. That's what lines the blood vessel. And then the tunica media is the middle layer. That's the muscle layer. And you'll notice that the muscle layer in the artery is much thicker than the muscle layer in the vein. And that's because arteries have their own pulse and can actually contract. And then the tunica externa is the outermost layer, that's like collagen fibers and things like that. And those are both a little different from capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessel where tissue or gas exchange and nutrient exchange happens. And so they're just lined with epithelial cells, and then they have a basement membrane on the outside. And so that way it's much easier for things like oxygen and carbon dioxide and things to diffuse in and out of the capillaries. As mentioned before, arteries have a thicker tunica media than veins do, and capillaries are only 1 cell layer thick, and that again allows for exchange between blood and tissue, like gas exchange and things like that. Veins have a thinner tunica media than arteries. They also have valves, which is a very important difference. And the reason that veins have valves is because the blood pressure in valves is lower. It prevents blood from flowing backwards in the veins. And the lumen, or the opening in the side of veins, is open or larger than it is in arteries. So again, veins have valves, and that prevents blood from moving backwards. The arteries have their own high pressure, and so they don't have to worry about blood going backwards. But veins, because they're low pressure and often fighting gravity, if you imagine blood being returned from your feet to your heart, when the blood tries to flow backwards in a vein, it will cause these valves to close, and that way blood only can travel one direction, even if it's fighting gravity. So again, with the veins, they have a thinner tunica media, and they operate under a lower pressure. They do have a larger lumen than arteries, and because blood is returning to the heart, but they have less muscle in the walls, your skeletal muscle actually assists. So they have valves to prevent blood from going backwards, and then when the skeletal muscle contracts around a vein, it pushes the blood through the vein towards your heart and helps to return blood to your heart. And that's part of why, like during the day, you don't end up having edema in your ankles or cankles every day, right? Because you've got muscles that in your skeleton that squeeze on those veins to help push the blood back to your heart. So when skeletal muscle assists in this process, when you contract a skeletal muscle, usually it changes in length and width. So that can cause it to squeeze the vein. And when the vein is squeezed, the blood travels up towards your heart, and then the valves will close like this if blood tries to go backwards. So in your arteries, the blood is pumped by the heart. It's very high pressure, and blood does not tend to go backwards. Whereas veins, in order to move blood forward, will use the milking action of muscles to move the blood. Capillary beds are still pretty high pressure, so they don't need to have valves either. They have several different types of vessels that assist. So with each capillary bed, you have something called a vascular shunt, and that's a vessel that connects an arteriole, or a small artery, directly to a venule or small vein. And then you also have structures called true capillaries. These are where the exchanges happen. So this is where oxygen can cross to your cells and carbon dioxide can be retrieved from your cells, where it will eventually go to the lungs. In this diagram, you can see how capillaries are connected to arterioles and venules. And so you can see the vascular shunt is this structure here and how it connects the arteriole directly to the vein or to the venule. There's also little muscles called precapillary sphincters, and you can see those little guys here. And they have the job of deciding whether or not the capillary bed is going to be open, because gas exchange happens here in the true capillaries, so that's where oxygen can leave the bloodstream and carbon dioxide can be loaded into the bloodstream. If the precapillary sphincters are closed, like they are in this picture, you'll notice that blood does not travel out to the capillary beds. And the reason that happens is because of usually like a vasoconstriction. So like, let's say for example that you are in the sun and you're really, really hot and your body wants to get rid of heat. These little muscles are going to be open because the closer that blood flows to the surface of your skin, the more heat you can dump. And then conversely, if your body is cold, it's going to want to keep more of that warm blood by your vital organs, so it will close those little muscles, and that way blood will spend more time keeping your body warm and you won't lose as much heat.